Just at the outset, as Teachta Dála for Cavan Monaghan, I would like to pay tribute to a past pupil of mine, Sonia Lee, and to her family for the strength and resilience they've shown, not just in the last few weeks, but over the last 2 years, since Sonia endured a horrific attack by her former partner, leaving her with life-changing injuries, and I'd just like to wish her well in the future. The unprecedented levels of gender-based violence, it is a global problem. It transcends all borders and age groups and socio-economic groupings, and it causes untold heartache and hardship for families from all walks of life. So in Ireland, the mental and physical and sexual abuse endured by women cannot be overstated, and it is truly shocking. As well, conservative estimates show that at least 1 in 3 women will encounter violence at some stage in their lives from a current or a former partner, and 1 in 7 enduring severe or life-threatening abuse. In this small island, we have the second highest number of women in the EU who avoid places or situations for fear of being targeted for assault. Since 1996, up to the end of last year, 230 women have been killed in Ireland as a result of domestic abuse, so that's an average of 10 per year. Most were killed in their own homes, and 30% of the women who experience domestic violence are physically assaulted for the first time during pregnancy. So I think these are frightening statistics, and they illustrate the extent of the violence directed towards women in a supposedly civilised society. And it's an intolerable situation, and it can't be allowed to continue. To tackle this worsening problem, I think an interagency, cross-departmental approach is needed to assist the victims and survivors of domestic abuse. It requires closer cooperation between governmental departments, such as this Department of Justice, but also with housing and health and social protection, who need the resources and the personnel to act in a collaborative manner to better protect women from abusive partners. One of the main reasons many women do not leave an abusive relationship is the shortage of available and affordable accommodation that, if available, could rehouse the victims of abuse at short notice. Now, according to the Council of Europe, it's recommended there should be 1 refuge place per 100,000 people. So if that was applied to Ireland, it would mean there would be 446 refuge places. But in reality, there's only 143. So that's simply not good enough, and it must be addressed as a matter of priority by the next incoming government. Otherwise, the number of women who suffer domestic abuse will continue to rise. It should also be noted that not everyone fleeing an abusive situation requires a refuge, but they need to have options that they can live free from a violent partner. So housing is a key requirement that needs to be made available to those fleeing domestic abuse, and 1 in 4 women become homeless as a result of domestic abuse. Now, in my constituency of Cavan Monaghan, there is a severe lack of emergency accommodation available to at-risk women. This large rural constituency doesn't have 1 refuge, and there are only 3 staff employed to assist vulnerable women across the 2 counties. Undoubtedly, it's one of the worst funded areas for domestic violence supports, and is a situation that can't be allowed to continue. As far back as 20 years ago, there was a site and adequate funding secured to provide a refuge, but the support services were not made available. The Department of Health failed to provide enough staff to ensure the supports were in place to help vulnerable women. And in an effort to address this dire situation, Monaghan County Council indicated a willingness to provide 5 houses in the county as part of a Part 5 development in housing estates. But again, the proposal failed to materialise because support funding from the HSE was not forthcoming. So it beggars belief that in a supposedly modern, progressive society, women whose lives may be at risk from serious violence have no safe haven to turn to in either Cavan or Monaghan. Now, Ireland signed up to the Istanbul Convention a year ago, so it now needs to fully implement the recommendations it committed itself to. Responsibility for overseeing supports, I think, should be left with the National Office for the Prevention of Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence. I understand that this is possibly that the services are going to be regionalised. I think that would be a regressive step. If that's true, maybe it's not, and I hope it isn't, because not every county is properly supported by the services within their region. On a more positive note, I wish to commend the Gardaí for the response they have shown in dealing with reports of abuse in the home and the way they have dealt with breaches of court orders during the COVID restrictions. And similarly, I want to acknowledge how the courts have dealt expediently with court orders during the lockdown, which has greatly exacerbated the crisis in domestic violence. I have, Minister, a number of questions in relation to this issue I hope you will provide answers to. The first question is, will there be a review of sentencing in cases of non-fatal domestic abuse? Because I just feel that the sentencing is not reflective of the seriousness of the crime. Secondly, are there plans to set up a domestic homicide review mechanism with powers to make and monitor recommendations on a response to domestic violence? And are there plans to appoint a minister or form an Oireachtas group with responsibility of bringing together representatives of the relevant authorities, the Gardaí, the Court Service, TUSLA, local authorities, the HSE, Department of Social Protection and the Specialist Domestic Violence Services to ensure a multi-agency approach to deal with this issue. Because this is something I would strenuously advocate and is absolutely necessary if the Government and this House are serious about addressing the issue of domestic violence and the plight of women whose lives are being placed at serious risk on a daily basis. I also would like to call for the restoration of pay and conditions for domestic violence services staff who play such a vital role in helping people who find themselves in abusive relationships. And finally, Minister, I also wish to point out the media coverage of some of these cases has left a lot to be desired in the past. There have been times when fatal acts of domestic violence have been described as tragedies. A tragedy implies to me an unfortunate incident that could have been avoided, such as an accident. Death resulting in domestic violence is just plain murder and should be called such. Otherwise, we run the risk of normalising the sickening abuse of women when they are targeted by their violent and often unrepentant partners.